Good morning, everyone. I'm about to get started on the topic of avoiding buyer's remorse. If there's anyone else who'd like to join us, then please do head over to Theatre 11. My name is Lars Highland. I'm the CLO, Chief Learning Officer at Totara Learning. We're an open technology provider, and we have an extensive network of organizations using Totara around the world, and an extensive range of partners here today at Learning Technologies. In fact, we have 10 of those, which you can learn more about our platform if you so wish. So today's session is going to cover probably a topic that's a lot of people have experienced, I think, if they're in a position to be buying learning technology of any sort of nature, in particular more complex solutions or platforms or technology that needs configuration and support and rollout and engagement. And in doing so, it's unfortunately, many people can fall into quite common traps when it comes to buying that technology. So this session is going to cover in a bit and give you hopefully some hints and tips as to how to improve that process. But first of all, we'll have a closer look at why does it often fail us. So one of the things that us at Totara is very much dedicated towards is opening up the access to the learning technology that should be quite of strategic value and importance to you as organizations. The freedom to innovate should be yours. The freedom to have a choice over how you're supported, whether you're doing that yourselves or whether you're working with partners to provide that expertise and additional services that really give value to a learning platform. The ability to manage that total cost of ownership. So it's not just the price you pay up front, but what does it cost over the lifetime of that solution, and how does that lifetime get extended and evolve to meet your particular business needs? All in the interests of improving the learning experience that you offer your learners in your audiences, in your organizations and outside your organizations. So giving them and you the freedom to design learning experiences that are really powerful. So some of the things I'm going to talk about are drawn from quite a long range of experience, being on both sides of the process, both offering solutions to organizations like yourselves, but also in terms of also buying them as well. So I've been a buyer too. But the organizations, there's 1,600 of them around the world. We've got 14 million learners out there using it, and also around I think it's growing to about 8,000 learning professionals like yourselves who are challenged with this. You know, how do they get their learning solutions to resonate? How do they get real business value out of them? And too often, you don't, because it doesn't roll out in the right ways that you expected, or your vendor that you've chosen doesn't support you ultimately in the way that you expected. So typically a few organizations that already use Totara, but you can learn more about that on our website, where we've got about 240 odd case studies. So you'll find one that's relevant to your own organization, I'm sure. So how does learning technology procurement fail today? So let's go run through a scenario that may well be familiar to some of you who have been through this process already. And if it's not familiar to you, this is what you need to avoid. So typically, you'll start with looking at deciding on a solution that you're looking to, or a technology that you need into your organization. So let's assume that's some sort of learning platform, and you'll see plenty of them here in this organization, in this exhibition and conference area. But just looking at learning platforms themselves, or learning management systems, narrow it down even further. If you were to do a bit of cursory research, you'll find there's probably about 700 of them. Some people say there's 1,000 of them out there in the wild, all offering, you could argue, that basic sort of launch, track, manage, maybe a bit of reporting around it. But after that, everything sort of, the variety and the diversity sort of diverges from there. So it can be bewildering. So if you're trying to buy something, where do you start? So maybe you're going to have a look at some analysts and the reports that they can offer. And so that can help hone your focus down into what may be listed as market leaders. And there'll be about 20 or typically in the average report that they'll sort of focus you on. However, that's not necessarily going to be the best fit for you and your organization. There's often biases attached to those reports, not deliberate ones, but often it's down to things like marketing budget or things like just having big names that have case studies that people then focus on. So again, it's important to think carefully about what your own organization and what the real parameters are around your business, rather than taking those as read. So yeah, you'll have a look at some reports. And then what we all do is we ask our own network, which is not a bad strategy. If you've got a good network, you've got peers around the world these days that you can tap into, ask questions. So what do you use? Is your organization similar to my organization? What recommendations would you make? And you'd hope you get some positive recommendations. Again, as we've also seen, a lot of learning platforms and implementations of learning platforms, because there are challenges in terms of either the technology itself being inflexible or the implementation itself lacking engagement, you may get a sort of negative response. And it may not be the technology's fault, it may actually be the implementation's fault. And it's hard to unpick, again, whether that's going to be of, what's the value to you and your organization. Moving on, you've now decided, or you now need to be thinking about what the requirements are that you need. So typically, you'll build some sort of feature request, and that's arguably the wrong way around. You should be thinking very carefully about what the business needs are that you have, and then sharing those needs out in a meaningful way to others to help you, point you to the right mix of features, perhaps, of a platform that would then maybe get you closer to what may be a good fit for you. But it's very easy to just default back to, okay, I need to future-proof this. What does everyone have? And I'll build a nice big long list of features, and I'll ask for all of that. And you'll often get ticks in all of the boxes, or you'll think you're getting ticks in all of the boxes. So again, it's very difficult to know whether those ticks are meaningful and will be delivering the value that you really need in your organization and how you need it implemented. So you then send that out to a range of vendors that you've selected off the previous process, complete a request for information, and then a request for proposal, and then you get your responses in. And as I say, if everyone ticks those boxes back to you, it's quite difficult to differentiate between them, because you're focusing on features and not the value to the business that you're looking to achieve. You go through a selection process, so you will shortlist. You'll get some short demos typically, and they'll hone in on features, and they'll tend to be the snazzier features, perhaps, the most elegant looking or good looking examples that they have. And probably too little is spent talking about the implementation process, the support you're going to get, how will you and your chosen vendor and platform cope with change, because we all know that your organizations are going to be subject to change, and that change is going to be happening more rapidly, more frequently. That iteration cycle is just accelerating. So those requirements that you listed at the start, 6 months later, could be different. And will this technology decision that you make help you in that process, or will it hinder you? So the typical result can be, you make your choice, it takes longer to actually implement than you thought. We all want it to happen at the pace that we think it would happen. Typically, things will change. The business needs change, as I say, before you actually fully launch. It's not untypical for certain implementations to take 12 months, maybe 18 months to take if it's fairly complex. Your organization is quite complex. But should it really be taking that sort of length of time, and should it really be taking that length of time to get started on realizing any value that you're going to get from the organization, for your organization? So your requirements change, and then you've got to handle that. So that can typically equal high cost. And you may have no mechanisms or limited mechanisms to actually adjust to that in your organization if you haven't planned for it up front. As a result, you may not succeed with your engagement. It's not the right solution. People aren't using it. Tumbleweed. So, other things that can happen is that your team changes on you in that 12-month period. People move jobs. Knowledge gets leaked out of the organization. That can also happen to your vendor. It's not unusual. How do you manage that effectively or avoid those challenges? How do you justify additional budget if you're not thinking ahead and planning for that sort of change? So it ends up with the platform not really delivering the value that you really wanted in your business. And so the whole cycle just starts again after 3 or 5 years. So you go through the buying process, you implement, it doesn't really do what you wanted it to do. You have remorse, and then you start the whole cycle again. So that's all a bit depressing. If I just left it like that, that doesn't suggest there's much scope for improvement, but there is. Don't worry, there is definitely things that you, as individuals, as learning professionals, and working with leadership teams, is to sort of shift adjust your thinking to avoid that procurement failure situation. So, for example, you can play a role in helping vendors answer the right questions for you. So try and avoid overly complex documents that, if they're hard and time consuming and the whole procurement process is lengthy, accumulates up to being quite a heavy cost that they're bearing on your behalf, collectively ends up being a cost that we all pay in terms of the implementations and costs of the solutions that we have. The feature comparisons that we have, make sure that they're really aligned to business needs. And how much does the vendor understand about you as an organization? How much do you understand about the vendor? How much time are you really taking to understand if there's a good collaborative fit? Too often that just doesn't happen. You just race through this process and don't actually have that shared understanding. And that means there's a missed opportunity in actually shaping the solution that would really make more of a positive difference for you. And not really thinking about change and dealing with uncertainty and actually recognizing that that's going to happen and recognizing that you're going to need to work collaboratively over a longer period of time for this to be successful. So what's driving all of this, I think, is a shift between what we see as a status quo right now in terms of learning and development needs. Learning just in case, we're moving away from that to something that's much more about continuous learning just in time. Move away from reactive prescriptive learning, more proactive demand-led. Not so much generic solutions, things that are maybe based on generic type of content, but are contextualized. Contextualization is really key to successful learning. It needs to be differentiated, thinking about specializing, mass specialization and personalization for the learner themselves, down to the individual learner even. Proprietary closed solutions, they tend to be more difficult to adjust to uncertainty and change. Thinking more about open technology, technology that you and your chosen vendor can actually dive into if needed to integrate well, extend, brand, theme, add real strong value that's going to differentiate your organization really deeply around your own business needs, which in the future, well I say the future right now, is actually one of the key things that will differentiate your individual businesses. How well your people cope with change, how well they acquire new skills, behaviors, and how they iterate, how you manage that iterative process, because that's not standing still, that's moving constantly. So shifting away from actually relinquishing quite a bit of control and giving that to the vendor, and instead taking that on yourself and being able to work collaboratively with that vendor so that you are in control of this whole process. And you move away from that cycle of investment, stagnation, start again, stop, start again, and into one where you're cumulatively investing on a platform or an architecture, should we say, or a framework of technology that is open to be shaped according to your own individual organizational needs. That way, you get the cumulative benefits. That way, you're not throwing things away and starting again. You are able to adjust course much more readily. Right, so how should we practically respond better to that? So, just a bit of background research here from Deloitte. They did a survey of procurement officers back last year, and these were the top 3 key issues. No surprise, top one is cost reduction. Obviously, managing cost in a business is really critical. But equally, bringing new products to market and innovating is rightly also seen as a way for an organization that is in a sector, which frankly is nearly every industry sector, will be struggling to redefine itself, either through the digital transformation that that sector is facing, and that will just impact all of your organizations very broadly. Learning technology should be strategically part of that process, and too often isn't. It's seen more of as just a managing cost of training people, which is strategically sort of the wrong way around of thinking, I think, to manage this effectively. And then managing risk. So we will, depending on the nature of the sectors, those risks will be different. But there are real, I can't say it, life-threatening, life-threatening threats to your business existing just with a 5-10 year horizon, given the sort of rate of change that we're all experiencing. So this shift in procurement towards innovation and the value is gathering pace, and the leadership, all of our talent, ourselves, but also the people that we're serving and supporting as learners, it's really critical that they're empowered to sort of evolve that way, and that the technology platforms that you are investing in, the learning technology platforms that you're investing in, really do help shape that. Now, a lot of words on this slide, but it's worth capturing and just looking at that a little closer, because the truth of the matter is that a lot of organizations are weighed down by legacy practices, and you need to confront those, and you need to discard them before true change will happen in your organization. And one of the areas to look at is your procurement practices, because they're typically slow, or too typically slow, or misguided in their approach. So being able to influence that differently so that you're shaping that process to be more effective to deliver this change, which is helping your organization move more quickly and adapt more quickly and make the right technology decisions, is actually quite critical. So organizations need technology that is open, flexible, and built to absorb change. If you can do those things, if you can shape your thinking around that and ask those questions of the vendors that you engage with, you're far more likely to be in a position to support this sort of shift for your organization. Now, this process has been ongoing. It's not brand new. Ourselves at Totara have been offering a solution that is very much built around that sort of strategic reshaping. And in fact, around the world there have been shifts towards thinking about open technology and open frameworks as a more adaptable, more agile way to respond to the world around you. And even here in the UK government back in 2010 was very much recognizing the value. The value shift had to change from just driving down costs to one that's driven more and centers around flexibility. So if you can be reassured and prove and evidence that the solutions that you're buying are giving you that flexibility, then you're in a far better position than you would be otherwise, just by going for that sort of short-term, maybe cheaper, but genuinely inflexible situation. Okay, here's a few tips that you can perhaps start thinking about applying when you next come to your procurement, next procurement. As I say, think about flexibility first. Your business will change. How will you cope? How will your vendor cope with you? How will the technology shift with you? Can it? If it's proprietary perhaps, or very locked down in its approach, then there's a high chance that your needs in the future, in the near future, will not be met effectively. So will you be able to add features Are they features that are just come from one source, or do you have an ecosystem around that that you can draw on that will be more adaptable to your need? And do you have a choice of support? So with Totara, you do have an extensive choice of support. Just here today, you've got 10 partners that you can go and talk to that all offer Totara-based learning solutions. They all have different approaches, and you can find the right sort of partner that could best fit your own culture needs. Do you have continuity with those vendors? Again, if you don't have that choice of where to go, you could be in a situation where you might be with a proprietary SaaS type organization that may be well financed now, but ultimately might disappear on you. What happens? What happens to your solution? Do you have any control over that? Well, typically you don't. So strategically, you're in a weaker position than if you have taken ownership of the technology you're investing in. Can you integrate easily? Do you have the flexibility to integrate with maybe quite bespoke systems that you have internally in your organization, which are differentiating you in your own chosen markets? The future is one that is digitally based, and the systems that you have and how interconnected they are and how well they support your people is really critical to success. So if your learning technology can't interface with that readily, then again, that's a weak point. And finally, that total cost of ownership. We do need to manage cost effectively, but don't just think about the short-term buying process. Think about the long-term. One key piece of advice I'd like to offer you is that as much as this may be challenging for many of you to sort of negotiate internally, but to actually spend a bit of money during that procurement process, working with a select bunch, a pre-selected vendor, a few vendors, to actually spend more time to build that shared understanding of what it is you're trying to achieve. Now, this would apply more for those strategic sort of learning platform decisions that you'd be wanting to make. But having been on both sides of this process, if you don't engage effectively, if the engagement is purely at a distance through complicated documents, a very short presentation or demo experience, it's very unlikely that you're going to get a clear picture on both sides. So spending a bit of time and actually going through a process by which you are almost rapidly dry running the solutions that you think you want, often you'll find it's not quite what you wanted, it's something else. And by the end of that process, you'll have a proper detailed breakdown of all of the associated costs and risks and actions that need to be taken to deliver that solution. You'll have an executable project plan that is realistic and not wishful thinking. And you'll have demonstrated to you the level of service and the collaborative fit with perhaps 1, 2, or 3 different vendors. And you'll be able to make a much more informed choice as to who's going to work for you and work well with you. Now, it does take an upfront investment to do that. It doesn't have to be that much, but if you built that into your procurement thinking, there's a far, far higher chance that you're going to come out with a successful long-term relationship with the vendor, and certainly with a strategic technology decision that's going to really make a positive difference to your organization. So hopefully that's been helpful to you and of value to you. I'd like to invite you to take a look at some resources that you can use to sort of further this thinking on. There's if you go to freedoms.totaralearning.com, you can have a look at a deeper sort of take through or explanation of what those freedoms really mean. There's also a deeper guide that you can download from that too. And if you join our Totara community, which is actually that community of learning professionals that I mentioned before, thousands of learning professionals are in there. It's an opportunity to sort of interact and share and collaborate with others who are going to be in similar situations to yourselves. In there, there's we provide an editable template and a guide to creating a request for proposal that asks the right sort of questions that you should be considering in that process. So it's a useful resource. It's It's agnostic, and it's also editable, so you can change it to suit your own particular organizational needs. So please, I'd invite you to join and come in and find that resource and also interact with others who are there. And if you are in the Totara community, then there will be a guide, quite a detailed guide that goes much deeper into some of these sort of changes that you can make to a procurement process. This will be available in the next week or so. So do come in, do join us, and thank you very much for your time today, and enjoy the show. Please do make some time to visit these guys. They'll have some very different approaches to how they're using Totara itself, but also good experience and examples that no doubt your organization will benefit from. So please do take some time to do that today. Thanks again, and enjoy the show. Thank you.